Have you ever felt like a place held a dark secret? Like the walls were whispering stories of tragedies unseen? I used to think those were just stories. I thought I was just dealing with another night of mundane complaints at a station in Shibuya. I was wrong. So wrong. Tonight I'm going to tell you a story about a descent into the abyss of guilt and a chilling encounter with something ancient and malevolent. I'm going to tell you what happened to me. It started at 11:47 p.m. The fluorescent lights of the complaints office hummed, a monotonous drone that burrowed straight into my skull. The air hung thick and stale, a miasma of recycled ventilation and the lingering scent of cheap ramen from the lower levels. My fingers tapped a restless rhythm on the worn laminate of my desk. It was just another night shift, another parade of lost umbrellas, delayed trains, and the simmering low-grade rage of Tokyo's commuters. God, I hated that job. It wasn't supposed to be like this. University, all those late nights fueled by instant coffee and the grand illusion of a future brimming with purpose. It all felt like a cruel joke. There I was, holding a gleaming degree in sociology, reduced to a glorified complaint repository in a forgotten corner of a station in Shibuya. My gaze drifted to the interview room. It was a small windowless space, barely large enough to accommodate a table and 2 chairs. The walls were painted a sickly pastel green that seemed to amplify the room's inherent claustrophobia. It was usually empty. Tonight, though, the air around it seemed different, thicker somehow, almost viscous. I shivered, despite the stuffy heat. I blamed it on the lack of sleep. A muffled announcement crackled over the PA system, the syllables blurring into an incomprehensible drone. My eyes burned, and I rubbed them, willing away the fatigue. I needed to focus. I needed to finish my report detailing the week's surge in complaints about unexplained disturbances on the platforms, strange shadows, unsettling whispers, people claiming to see figures lurking in the periphery that vanished when directly confronted. My supervisor had dismissed them as mass hysteria, fueled by stress and the urban legend of the teke-teke, a vengeful spirit said to haunt the train lines. But the complaints were persistent. They were unsettling. Suddenly, the phone rang, a jarring shriek that cut through the hum. I snatched it up, forcing a professional tone into my voice. "Station office, complaints department speaking." The line was crackling with static. I could barely make out the voice on the other end. It was a man, breathless and panicked. "Help. I need to confess." "Sir, I'm having trouble hearing you," I said. "Can you speak louder? What seems to be the problem?" "The station. I have to tell someone before it's too late." Then the line went dead with a harsh click. I stared at the receiver, a knot tightening in my stomach. Just another crank call, I told myself. But something about the man's voice, the raw, desperate fear, it lingered. I tried to shake it off and return to my report, but the words blurred on the screen. The image of the interview room kept creeping back into my mind. It felt colder now, a palpable chill radiating from its closed door. Another hour crawled by. The station grew quieter as the last trains of the night rumbled through. The only sounds were the hum of the lights, the distant echo of cleaning crews, and the frantic thump of my own heart. Then he appeared. A salary man, no older than 40, stood hesitantly in the doorway of my office. His suit was rumpled, his tie askew. His face was pale and streaked with sweat. He looked haunted. "Excuse me," he stammered, his voice barely a whisper. Are you the one handling complaints?" I nodded, forcing a polite smile. Yes, sir. How can I help you? He took a step inside, his eyes darting nervously around the room. He seemed to be searching for something, or perhaps avoiding something. The air grew noticeably colder as he entered. I need to talk to someone, he said, his voice trembling. I have something I need to confess. Confess? What was this? A church? I suppressed a sigh. Dealing with eccentrics was part of the job, I supposed. Sir, this is the complaints office, I said, keeping my tone professional. If you have a complaint regarding the railway services, I'm happy to assist you. But if it's something else... No, he interrupted, his eyes wide with a desperate plea. It's about the railway, in a way. It happened here, at the station. He was clutching a briefcase tightly against his chest, his knuckles white. His breathing was ragged and shallow, and I noticed a faint tremor in his hands. Please, he begged, just listen. I can't hold it in any longer. It's eating me alive. His desperation was unsettling. I glanced at the interview room. It seemed to be beckoning, a silent invitation. Something in his eyes, the sheer terror, was impossible to ignore. Besides, what harm could it do to listen? It was a slow night. Maybe helping this man unburden himself would break the monotony. All right, I said reluctantly. You can talk to me, but please, keep it brief. I have a lot of paperwork to catch up on. He sagged with relief, his shoulders slumping. Thank you, he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. Thank you so much. I gestured towards the interview room. Let's talk in there. It's a bit more private. He hesitated for a moment, his gaze fixed on the doorway. Then, with a visible shudder, he followed me inside. The room felt even colder now, a damp, bone-chilling cold that seeped into my bones. The air was heavy, stagnant. I could feel the fine hairs on my arms standing on end. We sat down at the table, the cheap plastic chairs creaking under our weight. I waited expectantly while he stared at his trembling fingers. Finally, he took a deep breath and began to speak. It happened last week, he said, his voice barely audible. I was working late, as usual. My boss, he's been pushing us all to the limit. The pressure, it's unbearable. He paused, swallowing hard, avoiding my gaze. I was on the platform, waiting for the last train home. I saw her, a young woman, maybe 20 years old. She was standing near the edge, looking lost, distraught. He hesitated again, his breathing becoming erratic. I saw her stumble, he continued, his voice cracking. She lost her balance. She was so close to the edge. He stopped, his eyes filling with tears. He squeezed them shut, as if trying to block out the memory. I could have helped her, he whispered, his voice choked. I could have reached out. I could have pulled her back, but I didn't. He opened his eyes, meeting mine for the first time. They were filled with a profound guilt, a bottomless despair. I froze, he confessed. I was so tired, so stressed. I just stood there, and she fell. The room seemed to grow darker. The humming of the fluorescent lights intensified, morphing into a high-pitched whine that grated on my nerves. I felt a sudden pressure in my chest, a suffocating weight that made it difficult to breathe. She fell onto the tracks, he continued, trembling. The train, it was coming. I saw everything. The lights, the screeching brakes, the impact. He choked back a sob, his body shaking uncontrollably. I did nothing, he whispered, his voice filled with self-loathing. I just stood there and watched her die. As he spoke those words, a sudden gust of cold air swept through the room. The temperature plummeted, as if someone had opened a door to the Arctic. The single overhead light flickered violently, casting long, distorted shadows on the walls. And then it happened. The man gasped, clutching his chest. A look of horror spread across his face. My chest, he stammered, pain flooding his voice. It feels like I'm being crushed. He doubled over, his body racked with violent convulsions. He gasped for air, his face turning blue. I jumped to my feet, fear gripping my heart. "Sir, are you all right? What's happening?" He couldn't answer. He was too busy struggling for breath. He clawed at his chest, his eyes wide with terror. And then I saw it. A dark stain was spreading across his shirt, blossoming like a grotesque flower. It was blood, but not just any blood. This blood was black, almost viscous. It seemed to pulse with a life of its own. He slumped forward, his head hitting the table with a sickening thud. He was still dead. I stared at the body, frozen in horror. The room was silent, save for the humming of the lights and the frantic pounding of my own heart. What had just happened? I stumbled back, my legs weak. I had to get out of there. I reached for the door handle, my hand trembling, but as I touched the metal, I felt a jolt of static electricity, a sharp, stinging shock that made me recoil in pain. The door wouldn't open. I tried again and again. The handle wouldn't turn. The door was locked. I was trapped. Panic seized me. I pounded on the door, screaming for help, but my voice was swallowed by the thick, suffocating silence. I was alone. I turned back to the room, my eyes darting around in terror. The body lay slumped on the table, a grotesque tableau of death. The black blood continued to spread, staining the table, the floor, the walls. The shadows in the room seemed to deepen, to coalesce. They writhed and twisted, taking on new and unsettling shapes. And then I saw it, a flicker, a subtle distortion of the light, just at the edge of my vision. It was barely perceptible, a fleeting glimpse of something wrong. I turned my head, trying to get a better look, but it was gone. Just my imagination, I told myself. Just stress, just exhaustion. But I knew it wasn't. Something was here, something malevolent, and it was watching me. I backed away, pressing myself against the wall. I could feel the cold, clammy surface against my skin. I could feel the presence in the room, a dark, oppressive weight that seemed to suffocate me. I closed my eyes, trying to block out the horror. I tried to calm my breathing, to control my racing heart, but it was no use. I could hear it now, a whisper, faint, barely audible, but undeniably there. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. It was inside my head, in the air around me, in the very walls of the room. "You," it whispered directly to me. I squeezed my eyes shut, trying to block it out, but the whisper persisted, growing louder, more insistent. You have secrets." It knew. It knew about my guilt, my shame, my regrets. It knew about the things I had tried to bury, the things I had tried to forget. It knew about the exam I cheated on in university, the friend I betrayed to get ahead at work, the lie I told my parents about my career, about my happiness. The whisper grew stronger, more seductive. Tell me your secrets." I shook my head, refusing to listen. I wouldn't give it the satisfaction. I wouldn't let it inside my head. But the whisper persisted, preying on my insecurities, amplifying my fears. "You're a failure, a disappointment. You'll never amount to anything." The words stung. They were the same words I had been telling myself for years. I felt a tear roll down my cheek. I was losing the battle. The whisper grew louder, more insistent. Confess. Confess your sins. Unburden yourself. I couldn't resist any longer. The pressure was too great. The weight of my guilt was crushing me. I opened my mouth, and the words spilled out. I cheated on my university entrance exams. As I spoke those words, a sharp pain shot through my head. It felt like a white-hot needle being plunged into my brain. I cried out in agony, clutching my head. The whisper intensified, feeding on my pain. Yes, tell me more. Tell me everything. I couldn't stop myself. The words were flowing now, a torrent of guilt and regret. I betrayed my best friend. I stole her idea and presented it as my own. Another wave of pain washed over me. This time, it was in my chest, a burning, searing ache that felt like my heart was being ripped from my body. The whisper grew louder, more demanding. Yes, confess, confess. I was completely broken now. I had nothing left to hide. I lied to my parents. I told them I was happy. I told them I was successful. But it's all a lie. As I spoke those words, a final wave of pain engulfed me. It was everywhere, consuming me, tearing me apart. I collapsed to the floor, writhing in agony. I was dying, and the whisper, it was triumphant. Yes, you are mine now. I closed my eyes, accepting my fate. I was lost. I was damned. But then something happened, a memory of my grandmother, a devout Shinto priestess, a memory of her teaching me about the power of purification, the importance of self-forgiveness. A flicker of hope ignited within me. It wasn't too late. I could still fight. I focused my mind, summoning all my strength. I remembered the prayers my grandmother had taught me, the ancient words of cleansing and protection. I began to chant. My voice was weak at first, but determined. The room seemed to shake. The whisper recoiled, hissing in anger. I continued to chant, my voice growing stronger. The pain began to subside. The darkness began to recede. I opened my eyes. The shadows were dissipating. The black blood was fading. The flicker in the corner of my eye, it was shrinking. I focused all my energy on the flicker, channeling my will, my hope, my desire for redemption. And then it was gone. The room was silent. The air was clean. The cold was gone. I was still alive. I lay on the floor, exhausted but triumphant. I had survived. I slowly rose to my feet, my body aching. I looked at the man's body. The black blood was gone. The wound on his chest had vanished. He was still dead, but somehow different. I walked to the door and tried the handle. This time it turned. I opened the door and stepped out of the interview room. The complaints office was empty. The fluorescent lights hummed, casting a familiar glow. It was 3:17 a.m. I walked to my desk and sat down. I looked at my report, the complaints about strange shadows and unsettling whispers. I knew what was happening. I knew what Kageoni was. And I knew that it wasn't gone. It was just waiting for its next victim. I picked up the phone and dialed my supervisor's number. I had a lot to confess. But this time, I wasn't confessing to the Kageoni. I was confessing to the world,